Hey there, welcome back. This is Victoria and Ryan Cole. You're listening to Needed Conversation. So glad that you joined us for today's episode as we've continued our conversation about boundaries. We've had 2 episodes so far, and they have been really dense and full of information. So we encourage you to listen to those episodes if you have not listened to those. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast. Give us a rating, give us a review. We have over 100 episodes. If you're on a road trip, going to travel for holidays, we encourage you to listen together with your spouse, with your family. Those are the things that are really going to help you grow as individuals and also as strong families. So today's episode, more about boundaries.
Yeah, and I've enjoyed our conversation because I feel like we've taken the perspective that a lot don't, which is boundaries is about decisions that you make. It's not a desire to try to control someone else's behavior.
Yeah.
And whether that be marriage or dating or at work, boundaries are important because it's letting people know what you value. Mm-hmm. And that's what we've been saying. But before we jump into the conversation, as always, we want to make sure that you know that we're a ministry and we need your support to continue making episodes and producing content like this. We do a lot of work for married couples, helping them build healthy, thriving marriages, and even single people, helping them date and individuals discovering their purpose. Would you support our ministry? Go to moremostforever.com. You'll see a bunch of marriage content, but there's a donate button there too, so you can give to our ministry, and that would help a lot because this is what we do.
Yeah, we appreciate any support.
Absolutely. So let's jump into the conversation today about boundaries. And we went a little broad the last episode, helping you to understand what a boundary is and is not. Now today, let's talk about specifically what are some of the boundaries you should have in certain circumstances and how should you communicate them. I said last week a person without boundaries hasn't taken personal responsibilities for their life, that they're moved by the desires of people around them. A lot of people see boundaries as a negative thing, but in fact, they are the banks upon the river to help those relationships thrive and become more mutually beneficial. And so in order to communicate those boundaries, I think that you have to be comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. Mm-hmm. I think that if you have something that is offending you, then you should be bold enough to say it and say it in the right context, right? Especially if you're married and you're out in front of other people. If you feel like your spouse has done something to offend you or has crossed a boundary line, I wouldn't necessarily call it out in that specific moment, but I would wait until after you're with your spouse alone and address those things, right? You want to keep respect at the forefront of your relationship and say, listen, when this particular circumstance happened, I didn't appreciate it or I was offended by it. We need to set a boundary that when we're out and about, we need to leave by X amount of time, or we have a particular, look or something,
or touch on the
and
the
it
leg.
can be irritating sometimes if one of you is more social and the other is more like introverted and wants to be home and all of that, and you can ignore, but you have to create those boundaries and say, for the respect of this relationship, I value this relationship enough to put my desire to stay here longer to the side and for us to go home. And your spouse has their particular reasons why they have those preferences. And you have to respect that, because if you don't respect it, you are going to reap some consequences later on. For us, we know that if we stay out to a certain period of time and we have our kids with us, like, it may be okay, but once we get home, getting them in bed is going to be pretty miserable. Then we're going to have attitudes, and then we're going to go to sleep with attitudes, and then our kids are not going to sleep well. So it's all of these ripple effects.
It just trickles into it, yeah. But I think what we talked about last week about having personal boundaries, identifying, those boundaries and sticking to them, being a yes or no woman or man, standing by your word. I think one of the issues that we really see is when we start dating, like we're unsure of our boundaries, or we also are too afraid of what somebody else thinks of us. So in the dating world, okay, well, what do you want? No, well, what do you want? But when truly you actually do have a preference, but you are trying to appease that person that you're dating, or you don't want to hurt their feelings.
And I think it's important to be considerate.
It is very important, but I think that can really easily trickle into your marriage, where you're now not being honest of what it is that you need to accomplish or what you need to do, what your boundary is. And so now you've dated, you've made a commitment, and now you're in this marriage, and you're like, well, I don't know how much longer I can pretend about what do you want? Well, what do you want? Instead of being truthful and honest of what it is that you want to do.
But in dating, I do think that there is a difference between being high maintenance and having high standards.
Yeah.
I think high maintenance is very superficial. Like you have a lot of superficial requirements upon the relationship that have no eternal bearing. Being high standard means that you have high values and morals that you want to uphold, and that your boundaries are attached to a particular set of values and beliefs, and that you're enforcing them by communicating those values. I do think that oftentimes we can get into the habit of labeling people with high standards as high maintenance. And if you've been labeled as such, that doesn't mean you should lower the standard. It means that they just don't have the capacity for the standards that you have created for your life. Those have to be communicated up front. I was getting my hair cut yesterday in the barbershop. And this barbershop has the typical men, like barbershop vibe, like more so than any other barbershop that I've gone to. And I've gone there a couple of years now. But the men will raise their voice. One barber will be screaming at the other one. And they're, you're talking about dating or women or whatever. And, I'm just sitting over quiet, listening, observing. And it's fascinating to me. I'm not sure if some of them might be believers, some of them not. But it's very evident to me, even between young and old, that there was a lack of guidance as they were being raised as men as to how to date, how to set boundaries, how to choose a woman. And a lot of the conversation ends up pointing to the other person to blame them, for a particular environment in the dating world. Like the men are blaming the women, and I'm sure the women are over there blaming the men. Mm-hmm. Like, why can't I find a good man? The one thing that they were arguing about was who cheats more, men or women. And within the context of this conversation, nobody talked about whether they were referring to dating relationships or marriage, but it was very evident that they were talking about dating relationships, and they were imposing their own opinions on what the consensus would be based on their personal dealings with women. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I just sat back, thinking about, listen, you can say that women are looser than they've ever been before. And they were saying, one of them in particular, women cheat on men more often than men cheat on women. And I'm sitting there thinking, but you picked them. Mm-hmm. And you set the precedence, right? And then also, you're offended with the fact that they're loose, but you benefited from that on the first date when they slept with you, right? Mm. So for me, if you have a woman that is willing to sleep with you and is sexually aggressive, particularly on the first date, right? How would you then expect them not
to have boundaries?
Yeah. And how would you expect them to have sexual boundaries in other ways, right? They were willing to sleep with you on the first date. They don't know you from Adam.
That speaks highly of you. How many other
men have they slept with? And you now expect this woman to be loyal to you after you've benefited from her looseness, quote unquote, and now you want her to be loyal. So you can't have it both ways. You have to set a boundary, right? And as believers, the boundary is, we don't have sex until marriage, right? And that's a firm boundary. It's because I value loyalty in sex, even to the extent of I want the only person that I'm going to have sex with to be the person that I marry. And that covenant gives us the grace that we need to handle the weight that sex is. Sex is a responsibility. It's a heavy weight, right? The statistics prove time and time again that if you have over 5 sexual partners before you're married, the chances of you ending in divorce or experiencing infidelity begin to quadruple. And these are just the statistics speaking. It's not just biblically speaking. They're just confirming everything that God is telling you. Preserve your sexuality. This is not a discouragement to people out there who have had a rippled past, but this is encouraging you today to set the standard, right? You aren't seeing and experiencing good men because you are
attracting that.
Yeah, you're attracting people by the standards and the boundaries that you set in the relationship. And it's okay to communicate it right off the bat. Like, what are you talking about on the first couple of dates, right? If your intention of dating is sex, I don't want to be a part of this. What is your goal in dating? Are you trying to be married? When would you like to be married by? Well, you're 22. I don't want to be married till I'm 30. Well, I'm not wasting 7 years of my life. I don't care how cute you are, how smooth talking you are,
how much money you have.
When a person tells you something, don't try to change who they are. That's their boundary.
That's exactly what we said in the first episode. Maya Angelou that was a quote. When people tell you who they are, believe them who they are. I don't know why often we want to impose on people what we think they could be, a potential. Or I can change them.
Control people with your boundaries.
Exactly.
You say, this is my boundary. And if you are not aligned with those boundaries and have similar ones, then we're not going to work here. And I'm not wasting my time anymore.
It's the deception of the enemy to tell you that you shouldn't have boundaries because you're not going to enjoy life. Just live your life, enjoy it, be drunk, be on drugs, sleep with whoever, whenever. But I think that what you don't understand is what he doesn't want you to know is the ramifications of that sin. And that sin brings death, and it's not physical death like we've had in the Old Testament, but it's slow. It's a slow progress where you're suffering emotionally, physically, mentally, emotionally. You don't know why you're feeling the way you are. Your emotions are all over the place. We're having a mental crisis like never before.
Don't always come immediately.
And the enemy does not want you to know. He does not want you to know that boundaries are healthy. Boundaries are there to protect you. Boundaries are there to protect others. They're not there to limit you. They're there to give you a blessing within those boundaries, just like a married couple enjoying the benefits of being married. Same thing, being a single person and enjoying the benefits of, being single. Looking back, we were both virgins when we first got married, and it's not to toot our own horn, but we see the blessing in that. And I truly don't feel like I missed out on anything. I don't look back and say I regret doing those things, because I see the effects of what we do, what we see daily, counseling couples, counseling individuals that have went through those things where they believed the lie of the enemy. And now they have to do a lot of unraveling and repenting and going back and saying, this was not right. This was not a proper boundary. And so I got hurt. And now I have to experience healing within my soul. And there is definitely healing. But don't allow the enemy to tell you that those boundaries are not there to protect you, that they're there to close you in and limit you from experiencing true life.
Yeah, I think especially in the United States of America, we have this warped view of freedom and liberty, as freedom being sort of the absence of boundaries and casting off all limitations. And, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. And while that may be true, that isn't the definition of freedom. I think that may be a closer definition to the word independence, right? Because you've casted off a dependence upon, another entity or a person, and you're becoming fully self-reliant. But really, in the kingdom, it's that you declare dependence upon God and allow him to set the proper boundaries. And freedom is expressed within the proper set of boundaries. And I say this to single people, right? There are certain limitation that God puts on you as a single person. And those limitations or boundaries are not there to keep you from experiencing wonderful things in life. They're actually to preserve you so that you will be able to experience those things within a greater context, within the context that he designed them to be experienced in. And there are boundaries that are then placed upon married people, right? The grass is always greener. We always look at and say, all of the single people are wanting to be married, and all the married people are wanting that single life. You keep wanting what you don't have, and you're in bondage. You're enslaved. But if you were to look at your season that you're in and say, what are the limitations that God has upon my life, and begin to live within those confines, you'll find yourself a whole lot freer in your mind. You'll find yourself a whole lot happier and satisfied with the way that you're living. If you are a single person, setting those boundaries, you could sleep with everybody, as many people. You could have 100 deep body count, right? But what is that doing to your soul? What has that quote unquote freedom given you in return? Nothing. You've sold something of immeasurable value for a cheap, momentary knockoff experience. And what you should do is embrace the limitations of the season that you're in and say, I'm going to value my body, my mental health, and the future marriage that I want to have enough to say no to sex that is convenient and available to me.
And I want to encourage those of you that, are on that path as singles, wanting to be married, wanting to have that companionship. And you hear people that are naysayers that may want to discourage you from continuing to walk in the purpose of God. Continue in that path. I mean, I've had so many people discourage me and, you're never going to get married. That's not the way to do it. You're never going to meet the right person. And honestly, to me, the way I met Ryan was not something I planned, not something I was looking for at all. And it came in the right timing. And the more I look back at it, the more I say, wow, that was really God's hand on this, because I really devoted my life to not being so preoccupied of thinking what some other person is thinking of me. And honestly, the enemy will work through people closest to you, and they will say things to drag you down and bring them into the dirt as well, because they think that, you're so holy or you're so goody good, let's get some filth and dirt on you as well. And unfortunately, the enemy uses even the closest people to you. But don't be discouraged. Surround yourself with good people. Continue to serve God. God's timing is perfect. And those boundaries are there, again, to protect you and to bring the best blessing. And what a great blessing it is to be able to say to your children, go in the way that I have went. And that's something for me that have encouraged me and continue to push me forward and say, I don't want to give myself away to just anybody. I want to be able to just give it away to my spouse and be able to show my children which way to go, because I see the blessing in that right now.
Yeah, when it comes to anything in life, like having an abundance of options overwhelms you to the point where you're drowning and are unable to produce anything of value, whether that be in your work, right? I think that's why job titles can be very important, or specifying job responsibilities and, what are the expectations? Because if I know what the expectations are, then I will know whether or not, I've hit the mark. And that's what sin does. Sin literally is translated as missing the mark. It's like an arrow that just goes off astray, and it doesn't even move any form or fashion towards that target. But revelation is light, that you turn on the light, you're able to see clearly. You understand, okay, these are the boundaries, and this is what missing the mark looks like. And the street goes both ways, whether you're single or married. When you're married, you may think to yourself like, sex is going to become boring, right? That I'm going to lose out on all of these other partners and experiences. And Let me tell you, sex can only go a number of ways, right? You might experience, other people and bodies, but, to explore one person for your entire life and the nuances and the depths of that person's soul, and not only the fact of, you can explore all kinds of physical things in the bedroom. You've created it as a boring space because you started valuing something outside of the boundaries of your marriage more than you value your spouse.
And it goes back to you don't understand the boundaries for yourself.
Yeah.
Because you're really seeking not really the act of sex, but you're yearning for something else. And it's maybe something that you're putting an expectation for your spouse that they're not able to fill.
Yeah.
And again, we say how we have written, the Spicy Sex book, and sex is just so much more than just a physical act. It's a prophetic activation. It's prophetic partnership. There's a comfort in that sex. There's intimacy in that sex. And you don't experience that.
It's the boundaries of the covenant. The covenant provides clear boundaries that you're able to experience all of these wonderful things, right?
Yeah.
When I think of the holidays right now, you have to set the oven to a certain degree in order to bake a cake or bake a pie, right? And then you have to wait. And then there are certain dishes that are so particular with those instructions. It's like, if you open the oven, that souffle is going to fall and it's not going to taste as good. And the boundaries are, I've got to keep this oven closed until that souffle has baked to perfection. Or if I turn this oven up any harder, I'm going to burn. And then, sure, the oven was hot, but I burned the cake in the process. And not only will I not be able to enjoy it, nobody's going to be able to enjoy it. Is that a weird analogy?
No. It's pretty good.
It's talking about boundaries in your life when it comes to dating, when it comes to marriage. You want to experience the best of life, and that's why God gives boundaries. Determining the right limitations or boundaries for your life in this season that you're in is what releases freedom. I hope that makes sense. Freedom isn't the casting off of boundaries. It's the enforcement of the right boundaries for the right season. And those change based on where you're at in your life. The Bible talks about stewardship, right? As long as you're young, you're under the stewardship and guidance of fathers and mentors, right? Until you reach the place of maturity where you're able to make decisions having recognized what boundaries are appropriate and not appropriate. And,
it's interesting, too, because boundaries should be created early on for a child. We see as parents that children actually crave boundaries. And I think if you teach your children how to have those appropriate boundaries with their emotions, with their physical health, with their mental health, with their emotional health, then they're going to grow up to be healthy individuals, understanding who they are, being self-aware and what God has called them to do, and also have the right kind of relationships. Otherwise, when a person grows up with no boundaries or lack of the boundaries, then they're going to seek attention or affirmation from outside sources, and that's why we see people act out. So this is why we believe that, marriage ministry is so important, because it's not only about you and me as a husband and as a wife, but it's us raising children of God. It's, raising them up in the way of the Lord, showing them the way so that when they grow older, they don't depart from that. And that's the responsibility of each one of us as parents. If you're a parent out there, or if you just got married and you're wanting to expand your family, you want to have children, that's a big responsibility that God puts in your hands, not only to have the boundaries within yourself, with your marriage, but also teach your children to have proper boundaries. And it takes work and it takes discipline, but the rewards of it, you're going to create, children of God that are going to be contributing members of society,
I think that this is one of the greatest atrocities of this present time that we're living in, is in how we're raising our children.
Yeah.
Quote unquote, free range parenting, or letting your child tell you who they are, what their gender is, when they have no concept of what gender is. We have to show them that there are absolutes in this world. Like there is absolute truth. You know, it is Jesus Christ beginning there. And it's written within the framework of our DNA. And if we don't set boundaries for our children, they will become reckless, irresponsible adults. Mm-hmm. We're raising them for the prison system. We're raising them for sickness and death. We should be providing the proper boundaries. That's what love is. Love is not, saying you can do whatever you want, whenever you want. Love is saying, no, I'm telling you this for your own good.
I love you too much.
I love you too much not to enforce this boundary.
Yes. And they may not understand it at this point and stage of their life, but they're going to appreciate it. We talked to our home group, and it was an interesting conversation. One of the girls shared she was from a big family, and her youngest brother, I guess her parents got tired of disciplining all the kids, and so he was yearning for boundaries so bad and being like punished or like acknowledged whenever he did something wrong. He actually requested to go live with his older sister.
Or and grandparents, something like that.
No, it was his older sister to enforce the rules. And she was like, I was just shocked. I was shocked that a kid that's 10 years old would ask for boundaries because they crave that. They need that.
Yeah, they do. They crave boundaries. And I know with my kids, they crave structure and order. All toddlers do to a certain extent, and some even more so. They need that in order to thrive. And that's what boundaries are all about. It's about self-control. But as leaders and parents, we have to help others determine, what proper boundaries are until they become aware. I think that we have misunderstood discipline for abuse. And you may have experienced abuse, but that is not the same as discipline. I think that that's the fine line between, even corporal punishment, spanking your children or whatever you want to say. There is abuse, obviously, and then there's discipline, right? Giving your child consequences for disobedience or behavior that doesn't reflect values that you've established as a culture in your home. So it's important to enforce those boundaries. And for the parents who aren't enforcing those boundaries, I can tell that they don't have boundaries themselves. They're living recklessly. They're living lives that are void of responsibility. And so if you want to have a prosperous new year coming up, I think these are the questions you should be asking yourselves. What are the boundaries that God has placed upon this season of my life? And within the confines of those boundaries, what is he calling me to do? Mm-hmm. I think that blockages to creativity and innovation come when there is not parameters or a framework for that creativity to be expressed, right? Yeah. Again, it's providing you too many options. If you provide a problem, then it's going to be easy to determine a framework for providing a solution. But if you don't identify what the boundaries are for this dilemma that you're in, you're never going to come to a solution, right? There's no end in mind. The same as with creativity, like songwriters, writers who write books. It's like they have quote unquote writer's block, but it's, you just haven't set parameters on. I know churches and pastors who say, if you're a part of this worship staff, you're getting paid to lead worship, you also have to produce 2 songs a month. I don't care what those songs sound like. I don't care what they're about, but 2 songs a month. And how they come up with those 2 songs? A lot of them will say, well, let's build them off of the topics of the sermons, or let's build them, let's throw out a list. They have songwriting exercise. You get a big fish bowl, you put paper topics in there, you pull it out, and you say you got 30 minutes to write a song about X. And some of the most creative expressions that we've seen from artists, painters, writers have come when they have been confined by certain limitations. And embracing those limitations, it's saying, I'm not going to focus on what I can't do. I'm going to focus on what I can do. And I'm going to thrive within that space. We wouldn't have the work of Beethoven. Mm-hmm. Isn't he the one who was deaf? I believe so.
I don't remember, maybe.
Who begin to create music based on vibrations and not based on what he could physically hear. I've seen artists who spent their career doing one type of art, and then they got tremors in their hands and they thought my career is over. But in fact, some of the greatest artwork that they created, performance art, moving in a different medium, enabled them to produce a greater capacity of work.
Yeah, there's people painting with their mouth. I know there's some great painters that
Exactly.
paint with their mouth or with their little drumstick, what they call it, like quadriplegic, and they have a little
your
hand.
limitations could be the death of you, or your limitations could give life to your greatest levels of purpose.
Yeah, this has been a really good conversation. I hope you guys have enjoyed it.
Think
It's
about
a
this
lot.
going into the new year.
Yeah, it's a lot to cover, but I think it's really going to help you to create and set boundaries for yourself, for your family, and then also for external relationships, whether it's family, whether it's work, whatever it is. We hope that that's going to help you to really think through these holidays, and as you step into the new year, maybe to reevaluate some of the relationships and creating proper boundaries, either for your kids, for your marriage, for your dating life. It's never too late to start right now, to live the best life that God has created for you to live, and enjoy the blessing in that.
That's right. Thank you for joining us on this podcast. We're going to have new episodes, new seasons coming up soon. Next year is going to be great for our ministry. Make sure you follow us at More Most Forever on Facebook and Instagram, or visit moremostforever.com for resources ranging from marriage to dating, and to give, to support our ministry going into the new year. If you're giving, year-end giving, you want tax-deductible donations, please consider our ministry as one that you support going into the new year, and we would greatly appreciate it. Until next time, this is Ryan and Victoria Cole, and you've been listening to Needed Conversations.
God bless.